this conversation that we're about to have about biodegradable shelters for wildlife. So I'd love to introduce Dr. Alex Carthey, who's going to walk us through this project.
It's really nice to be here. I haven't actually been to Woodford before, but I'm already inspired and very excited to try and come back. So thanks for having me. And it's really exciting to get this opportunity to tell you a bit about an initiative that I've started up on the side of my academic career. You can kind of see some hints on stage that I'll explain as I go through the talk. So just a bit of background about me. I'm a senior lecturer in environmental science and management at Macquarie Uni in Sydney. But my background in research and science has always been this deep interest in our native wildlife, and particularly the cute, small, furry things that run around on the forest floor that not too many people have a lot of knowledge about. And in particular, the way they're threatened by cats and foxes in Australia. I'm also on the side now a founder and the director of ReHabitat, which makes these biodegradable, flat-packed cardboard refuges for wildlife, which I'll be talking about as we go through this talk. So what drives and inspires me, and the thing I'm really interested about in my research, is thinking about habitat structure. So people are here for a weekend called The Planting. You know, I know everyone here likes to get trees in the ground. We probably think a fair bit about habitat for wildlife. But I really think on the small scale, so down at ground level, beautiful stuff like this picture that you hopefully can see on the screens if it's not too glary, of dense, coarse, woody debris. And I look at that fallen log on the forest floor and I see hidey holes, cracks, crevices, places that your little critters can dive into and escape from their predators. And the thing is that when you're thinking about small wildlife, they operate on quite small scales, right? So a lot of the ways we assess habitat with LiDAR or looking at big sort of landscape classifications, they're really at that large scale. But if you want to support little bush rats, bandicoots, antechinus, we need to start thinking about this small scale habitat structural complexity. And one of the reasons it's so important, as I've kind of alluded to, is that it helps that wildlife escape from predation. So we've got cats, we've got foxes, they've been introduced, they're really devastating for our wildlife, and particularly those guys that can't escape up to the trees, that live on the ground and the forest floor. And this image is from a cat-borne video collar. It's a still image showing a cat as it's hunting down a bearded dragon in some really open habitat. And that particular piece of research showed that cats are much more successful hunters and they capture a lot more of the animals they chase if they're in an open habitat without that habitat structure that I'm referring to. There's also been experimental work. So this graph is from a study that looked at enclosures of mouse populations on an agricultural research station in Victoria. And those different lines are the different types of enclosures that they had. And the dotted line in the middle kind of goes up from left to right over time. That is a mouse population that's just increasing over time because it's an enclosure where cats and foxes are completely excluded. So they've got no predation, the population goes up over time. In the light grey, which is on the bottom and kind of goes down from right to left over time, is an enclosure that is completely open to cat and fox predation. They can just hop over the fence and eat as many mice as they want. And where the experimenters mowed the enclosure, so it was essentially an open grass field. The mice had nowhere to hide, and as you might expect, the predators ate them, the population crashed. The top line there in the black is exactly that same treatment, but they put in a whole lot of cover for those mice, places to hide. There were still predators everywhere. They were trying their best to catch the mice, but by adding some cover for them, they managed to continue to increase, and enough of them survived. That population of mice did almost as well as the enclosures with absolutely no predators. So what I take from that piece of research is that if you want your native wildlife on the ground, little ground-dwelling critters, to survive with cats and foxes, having that dense habitat structure is really key and critical and can be just as good as controlling the cats and foxes, which, as many people probably know, is really difficult to do well. But what's one of the major things that removes that dense habitat structure? Fire, right? So in the Black Summer bushfires, 2019, 2020, we saw images like this. We saw animals that were injured that had survived the fires but were left in a habitat that looked something like this image here. And personally, with my research background, I looked at these pictures and thought, oh my God, they've got no cover left at ground level. They're going to be absolute sitting ducks for cats and foxes. And I was struck by the idea that we should do something to help them out. So if you think about the timeline across which a fire comes through an environment and that habitat recovers, you've got from left to right the pre-fire environment, the fire happens, and then you've got this critical post-fire period where that cover is gone. Any animals that have survived are now really, really vulnerable. But in Australia, we know that there are also cats and foxes. They're not just introduced, they're not already just a threat, they're actively attracted to the smell of smoke, and they will travel long distances to get to a recently burnt fire scar because they know that the hunting is going to be so good. So again, this idea that we should be putting something out there to help these wildlife, these little ground-dwelling critters, survive this critical post-fire period became this really driving sort of inspiration for me. And I looked around and I said, well, what are people doing? Surely people are trying to do something, and they are, of course, people are smart. So left to right here, we've got some of the alternatives that people have been trying out. So wooden pallets with a bit of shade cloth, they provide some shelter, they do quite a good job. Dragging together brush piles of the remaining burnt sticks and logs, or even these really cool chicken wire tunnels that Chris Dickman and others at the University of Sydney have been trialling in post-fire environments. A lot of these do a great job, right? They protect the small wildlife, they increase their survival in the face of those predators in the burnt area. But the thing is that after about 12 months, what looks like this, day 0 after the fire, often looks something like this. That veg grows back with a nice amount of rainfall. You can have head height, really thick, dense acacias. You can barely push through them. And if you've put out chicken wire or other sort of permanent materials, what do you do at that point? Do you try and take them out again? Are you destroying all that healthy regrowth? And then I guess the other problem with some of those current solutions was that they're very heavy, or you might be damaging that sensitive fire ground when you try and install them right after a fire. So then that's where the idea to make something that was biodegradable came from. We want something that will be there in that critical sort of 12-month period, but it will take care of itself, it'll biodegrade away. You don't have to worry about leaving plastic or metal or something else behind in the environment. So I reached out to a friend and a colleague who is an industrial designer, and he normally does artificial marine projects, so artificial reefs that they seed with coral, the Living Seawalls project where they do these hexagonal tiles on smooth harbour walls to create habitat for marine wildlife. And I came to him with my idea, and he designed this amazing, the one on the far left there, or my far left, your far right, the Habitat Pod. So this pyramidal structure is made out of sheets of natural cardboard. There's no glues, no dyes, no staples, no plastic, nothing like that. They're just clever laser-cut pieces of cardboard that you assemble into shape on site to make a little habitat unit like the one you see there. The great thing about these, apart from the fact that they biodegrade away, is that they're modular. You can put out 1, you can put out 3, you can put out 100, you can put out 1,000, and you can fit them around the rocks and the stumps and the logs and the things that are left behind in the habitat. So that has been an awesome experience. And just to go back to that little diagram, I mean, here's what we described before, left to right, critical post-fire period, lots of predators. What if we add in the habitat pods and we sort of get them through that really critical, vulnerable period? Hopefully we get higher population survival and persistence and resilience to future fires, because we know there will be more fires coming, right? So because I'm a scientist, of course, I can't just sort of come up with an idea and trust it's going to work. So we're doing a lot of field trials to test these. We've had some preliminary ones, but at the moment we've got our biggest field trial yet. So this is in collaboration with National Parks New South Wales. And there was a big hazard reduction burn up near Macquarie Uni where I work in Sydney at the end of February this year. It was 205 hectares and we have picked out 24 sites there. We've got 12 sites that are, 6 sites in the unburnt area with no pods, just unburnt reference sites. And then we've got 12 that are in the burnt zone. And at 6 of those, we've put out habitat pods, and at 6 of them, we've just left them as they are. And we're measuring everything from wildlife activity using camera traps through to invertebrate activity with little invertebrate pitfall traps. We're taking temperature and soil measurements and looking at the vegetation recovery at the different sites as well. So we'll be able to report back soon on what that data shows. But I do have some happy snaps from our very sort of first field trials, just showing some of the critters that have been using the pods. So again, hopefully you can actually see on these screens, it's not too bright. We've got everything from bandicoots, brush-tail possums. I think there's another bandicoot or bush rat in that one. Goannas, so we found that goannas quite liked climbing up the pods and sitting on there to bask and look around their environment. We also found little reptiles, like little skinks, would sort of move into the cardboard as it started to peel apart and create more cracks and crevices. Lots of bugs and things moving to that cardboard as well. And I don't know how well you can see this sort of bottom left video, but there was a cluster of 4 habitat pods, and a disgruntled lyrebird really took a disliking to one of them and decided to shred it over a period of about 3 or 4 days. It just kept coming back, attacked that pod. The ones in the background you can probably see it didn't care about. They were fine. It left them be. But what it let us see was this kind of accelerated biodegradation process, and we got this shredded pile of cardboard, which is what the other ones eventually turned into. And when you sort of went to the field and poked that apart with your toes, you could see, or your fingers, you could see termites, beetles, bugs, native cockroaches. And then you can probably see in this video, we ended up getting a bandicoot actually foraging around in that, like it's a big pile of mulch looking for those favoured invertebrates. So again, that was another sort of benefit that we hadn't really predicted, but we're really excited to see. So as they break down, they more or less turn into this thick, coarse debris that's like mulch, or what you would find on a really healthy forest floor before a fire. So they do biodegrade away quite nicely over 12 months. You can see on the left here, this is at North Head in Sydney, again with, excuse me, national parks. So there was a big fire on North Head Sanctuary in Sydney in about 2021, I think, and this was one of the very first field trials where we put them out. You can see them looking nice and fresh and crisp here on this picture. And after about 7 or 8 months, it looked more like this. So those plants are really just growing up through and around. We find they just pop out the holes that you can see there, and then they just grow, and the cardboard slowly breaks down and it just takes over. And then you have a nice healthy understory that the animals can live in like they naturally would. We did also look at their effects on temperature and humidity because we figured this might be quite important for animals. And we did that using these little eye button measures, data loggers. So it's about the size of a button battery. You might be able to see there, we put them in tea strainers on a little mini stake, so it's a bit above the ground, and it can just take every 30 minutes, what's the temperature, what's the humidity. And in this trial, we had them in these clusters of 4. Hopefully you can see that diagram there. So 4 of them all pushed together in a little cluster. And again, I'm not sure how well you can see it, but there is a diagram there basically showing where we put the eye button loggers. So there's a little orange dot here that is one logger that's just kind of away from the cluster of pods, and it's measuring the temperature and humidity at that site, so what's just going on ambient. And then we had there's a yellow one here that represents a data logger inside a pod, so what's happening inside the pod and how different is that to what's just happening at the site. And then we had a third one, this little red dot here, which was in the sort of corridor made by the cluster of pods, but outside the pods themselves. So this data is an average of all those 30-minute data logs across, I think it was a couple of months here, for all 24 sites. And only the sites that had pods, not all 24 of them. But the orange is the one that is the ambient site temperature. So we just zero that out because everything else is relative to that. So across the middle at 0, no temperature difference. This is the one that is at ambient temperature and humidity for the site. The red one is the one that's in the middle of the pods, the little corridor there. And even though it's outside a pod, we found that, and this, is 24-hour time. So this is the middle of the day here in the centre. The red one's got that big bump in the middle because it actually got warmer in that corridor between the pods in the middle of the day. So it was increasing the temperature there. And that was really interesting. We hadn't necessarily expected it, but it really gelled with the fact that we saw a lot of reptiles hanging out in that central corridor because reptiles like to be a bit warmer. A few degrees can make the difference between activity or not and being able to go out and get a meal or not. So that was kind of a cool outcome. And then the yellow is the data logger that was inside a pod. So in the middle of the night, on the far left and the far right, it was a few degrees warmer. So if the site's quite cold, you're a little bit warmer if you get inside a pod. And in the middle of the day, it was a bit cooler. So if you hop inside a pod, you're sort of escaping some of that midday heat. So what we're really seeing there is that the habitat pods do kind of buffer those ambient temperature extremes at the sites, which was cool. So just some of the people that we've worked with, we've got some great stories of how people have been using these. Most recently, there were big fires in the Grampians, and so Parks Victoria have put out a whole lot of our habitat pods, and they've worked quite closely with us to develop a monitoring program for those. and we've been getting some images back showing bandicoots and maybe a potoroo, and we'd love to see a potoroo actually hop into one, but we haven't seen that yet. But they've been a great sort of partner in this journey, and they're really excited to be using them. As I mentioned, national parks, we've got a few projects going with them in New South Wales. They've been great. A few different land care groups. The Sunshine Coast Council actually stopped on the way here. There's the Cresswell Road overpass. They've actually put them there on a wildlife crossing bridge, which is really cool. So on your way back home, you can stop in there, put it into GPS, Cresswell Land Bridge, Cresswell Road overpass. And they've got like a sort of 4 or 5 metre strip on the side of the overpass, and it's had an arboreal rope bridge for wildlife for quite some time, but it was getting quite old and degraded. So they've replaced that one for the arboreal species, but then they decided to try our habitat pods just to create some cover for the animals that want to cross on the ground. So they took all the weeds out, planted a bunch of tube stock native species, but it's going to be a while before they grow up to a good size and provide cover on their own. So the habitat pods are kind of providing these stepping stones of cover for any critters that want to cross the land bridge in the meantime. So that's really cool. Fulton Hogan in Queensland, they've been really great and supportive. Australian Wildlife Conservancy actually came up with their own usage for them, which was neat. So they've put them in predator-proof sanctuaries where they were introducing little native mice, pilliga and shark bay mice. And they were having a lot of trouble monitoring them after release, because they'd release these tiny little critters and then they'd bugger off. And they'd say, are they still out there? And the best they were doing was getting tracks and not really being able to tell how many there were. And so they actually suggested, and we said, go for it, putting the habitat pods out in front of their cameras as a little sort of focus of activity for the mice. So the mice started moving in and climbing around on them, and they got all these amazing camera trap images, and we're really happy with that, increasing their ability to monitor these reintroduced native species. So we love it when people want to use them for new ideas. It's really quite cool. The habitat pods themselves, I mean, this was supported in a big way by Taronga Zoo. We did this really cool program where they help you accelerate into a business for good or a not-for-profit any ideas to help the environment or improve sustainability, and that was fantastic. We won their grand prize. Had to do a very scary pitch event, but it was a really excellent experience, and they've been really supportive all the way through, right down to letting us trial habitat pods with some of their captive animals, including some very fat potoroos that managed to squeeze their way in. So I can now confidently say the largest animal that can fit inside a habitat pod is a fat captive potoroo. But we kind of got to that point, and then last year we were sitting around in the warehouse of the designer in Melbourne, and we were looking at the habitat pods, and I can't even remember who it was, but one of us was like, what if we made a hole in the middle for a seedling? And thus, our second product, if you will, was born. So this is the one that's closer to me on the stage. We're calling this the plant pod. And the idea here was that, okay, we're all into restoration and planting. We're at a planting weekend. But a lot of the planting that you see looks a bit like this image here, with lots of little tiny tube stock seedlings planted in a big open field. Maybe all the weedy vegetation's been removed. Or maybe you're rehabilitating after a big project's gone on. And you might be planting 1,000 koala trees, but it's going to be a really long time before they grow to the size that's going to support wildlife. So, and of that, I looked up the numbers. We plant about 5 million trees each year in Australia, and most people are using these plastic corflute tree guards for good reason. They protect plants from the elements, they protect plants from herbivory. But what's the cost of all that plastic? So again, I sort of ran the numbers and did a bit of research. 1 million trees planted in those standard corflute guards is the equivalent of 100 tonnes of plastic going into the environment. There are those flimsy sort of plastic bag type ones that have a lot less plastic in them, but that's still about 30 tonnes of plastic going into the environment for every 1 million trees. And I don't know about you, but I'm not sure how many of those are actually brought back in. This, I'm ashamed to say, is on the Macquarie University campus. I found these just walking around, but the more I look now with my eye in, I see this everywhere. You see trees, they're fairly well grown, and then at their base is an old plastic guard that is either strangling the tree, breaking apart, biodegrading, and it's super common. So there's a huge problem here just with the plastic issue. But it's also, you look at a field like this, and like I said, those plastic guards are providing, not only are the trees not big enough yet to provide any habitat, the guards themselves have zero benefit for wildlife, like absolutely none, right? So what if we could do a version of that that is not only biodegradable, but has inbuilt habitat for wildlife? And so that's what we've created here. You can see it here with the tree in it. And I'm not sure if you can see on the screen there, but maybe I'll flip this one over to show you the underside. So there's a double layer of cardboard there, right? Which is space for little critters to get inside and hide from their predators, cross a big open field of little planted seedlings. But the cardboard itself is also amazing in that it attracts invertebrates, beetles, bugs, little native snails, little lizards. And we just think we're pretty excited by our idea. While there are other biodegradable options out there, nothing else is providing habitat for any wildlife from day one of planting. And I guess, we sort of create something like this, and there's a lot more that goes into this than this sort of cheap plastic tree guard from China, and we just can't compete with those, which is kind of unfortunate in a way. But what we're really hoping to do is change that conversation around, trumpeting to the world how many trees we've planted. So you see all these sort of impact metrics and social media posts about 1 million trees planted, 1 billion trees planted, like fantastic, but how many of those are surviving? And are they actually, what's the impact on the environment? What's the plastic going into the environment? Is it actually doing anything for wildlife in the short term? So can we change that conversation from how many trees we put in the ground to what the actual success rate was and what the actual benefits for the environment were? So maybe we do fewer trees, but we do them better. Because if we look at this sort of compare the pair, to us it's kind of clear, the one on the right is a much better option in a lot of ways, but we just can't sort of do it for the same cheap 60-cent price if we were to get them from China and have them just be plain plastic. So how do they stand up in the field, you may be wondering? In beautiful rain like this, how does a cardboard tree guard actually do? So our longest running trial so far has been going for about 8 months at Tokal, which is an agricultural college near Lake Macquarie in New South Wales, north of Sydney. And our good friends at the Groundswell Collective, so these guys do the tiny forests planting, and they do a lot of tiny forests. But they did this trial planting for us there in an old cow paddock, which you can see on the screen there, hopefully. And they planted about 12 seedlings in 3 different types of guards. So maybe in the background you can see these little white ones. Those are the sort of classic milk carton ones that are the cheapest biodegradable option currently available. In the middle are our plant pods, and closest to the screen are your sort of classic plastic core flute guards. So after just 2 months, some of the guards, none of our ones, ours are on the far right here, but some of the plastic or milk carton ones had just completely disappeared after only 2 months. I was like, okay. A lot of the core flute and the milk carton ones had started to sort of close together and start strangling off the plants, which is just not a great outcome, and to sort of lift up off the ground, which is just letting in all the weeds, right? After 3 months, quite a few of the plastic ones had blown down or blown away. Oops, sorry. The milk carton ones, again, are sort of collapsing and falling over and just didn't really have very good longevity. So this, again, is a milk carton one that's just been pulled apart, maybe eaten by snails, a little hard to tell. And then over here is some of ours. They're just doing really well. So they hold that triangular shape. The mouth stays open. It doesn't collapse in on the plant. It really should help the plant like sway around and develop strength and not just get really top heavy quickly. So we're really pleased with how they're doing. And then on the most recent visit, this is one of ours. You can see it's really starting to sort of fall apart now, but that's 8 months in under a lot of heavy rain. And we started to find some really cool critters in there. So this little native snail in amongst it, some little native cockroaches that were too fast to photograph well. So we're really pleased with how those are going, and that's just our very first field trial that's been rolled out. But again, here comes the scientist. So I have a wonderful Master of Research student, Jessie, who is doing a really big planting trial on the Macquarie University campus. It's set out experimentally, so should be able to get some really good data from this. She's planted 300 small shrub and small tree seedlings, the kind of species you would normally plant as part of bush care or bush regeneration in the Sydney region. And she's got them separated into sort of replicates of 30 each. And in that, you've got 10 with our guards, as you can see towards the forefront of this photo, 10 seedlings with the plastic core flute, and then 10 seedlings with nothing at all, just to see what happens as sort of background effects. So she's going to take measurements over the next 6 months, looking at everything from plant survival, biomass, growth rates, height, everything you can think of, herbivory, air temperature and humidity, because that's probably quite important. Like if you've got a little plastic sheath around your plant, it's going to make it warmer, it's going to keep the moisture in. Some plants like that, some don't. We'll see how ours compare to that. The light penetration, so how well does light actually get down into the seedling? And we've put a lot of holes in ours, but it's probably still a little bit less light in there than in a plastic one. We're also going to look at the effects on soil moisture, pH, conductivity, and fauna, everything from using camera traps to look at wildlife, the bigger wildlife, your little birds, lizards, mammals. At the moment, I heard the first lot of camera traps is mostly magpies, but that's okay. And she's also looking at invertebrates. She's also going to document their biodegradation over time quite closely, so that will be really good to see how that goes. And stay tuned for those results because we're quite excited by this. So people always ask, and that's why I put this slide up, how much do they cost? How do we actually put them out? What's, the practical side of things? So we have this little summary of the 2 units, right? So the classic ReHabitat pod, like this very starting base price for those is $25 each, but that's if you just want 1 or 3. As soon as people start wanting to put out a lot of these, we do everything we can to make these affordable because we're not here to make money, we're here to make impact, right? So we're really keen to work with people who want to do things en masse, and we do everything we can to make prices come down. The key difference, of course, is the amount of space for a seedling or not. So the classic unit doesn't have a place for a seedling, and as a result, it has a lot more space for habitat for the animals. I actually just flip that over so you can see as well. Not So yeah, there's a lot more space for animals in that guy, and we do see bandicoots and quite large animals hopping in and out of those. We've done a big review of the literature and written a report for DECA, Victorian State Government, where we looked at how much cover we think is needed to protect small critters when there's foxes and cats around. And there wasn't that much out there to draw on, but the best we could suggest is about 10 to 40% cover, and you've got to make up that level based on what's already there. So if there's still a lot of cover around, maybe you only need a few extra habitat pods. If it's been really severely burnt, you want to put out quite a lot of habitat pods. So we're also really happy to work with people to advise them on their particular situation and how they might want to deploy them, in what patterns, in what areas, targeting different species. And I basically spend a lot of time on the phone with anyone who wants to have a chat about how they might be able to use them. And then the ReHabitat Plant Pods. So this is a tricky one because, like I've said a few times, we're competing with really cheap plastic sheaths, and we want people to adopt our unit. We know it's a lot more expensive, so again, we try and bring that price down wherever we can, especially if people want to use large numbers of them. It has that space for a seedling. As a result, while a bandicoot technically could fit in there, we haven't seen it happen yet, and we sort of think you're probably looking at your smaller critters to use that kind of smaller amount of habitat space in that little triangular donut there. And again, we'd like to see people putting them out in as many as they can manage, up to around 20% cover, but we also say, if you're doing 10,000 trees, maybe you just put one of these on every 10th tree or every 100, whatever it is. Even a scattering of them is going to improve things, right? So yeah, we're really happy to work with people, chat to them about exactly what they're trying to achieve and so on. So if anyone wants to reach out, we'd love to chat. And that sort of brings me to the end of my speaking section. So I just wanted to thank, I've had so many people support this, everyone with bushfire funding from WWF and Aussie Arc, the Taronga Zoo have been amazing, and then all the different sort of academic and science colleagues who sort of encouraged me and helped me out. So people who are doing the Living Seawalls project, Chris Dickman at Sydney Uni is an amazing terrestrial mammal ecologist, and he came up with the chicken wire tunnels. And even though I was like, maybe I think biodegradability is better, he wasn't, he was just supportive. He was like, that's an amazing idea, let's, make it happen. So he's fantastic. And then, of course, these students. So having science students who will go out in the field and take all those laborious, measurements day after day. You couldn't sort of gather the data and actually evaluate whether something's working without their help. So it's a great thanks to them. So that's kind of the end of the speaking section. But what I've found in the past is that people love to come and have a play with these and see if they can figure out how to put them together, maybe with a little guidance, yes or no. I was going to get Chris to come up and have a go as well. But if anyone would like to come and have a play, that would be fantastic. And kind of while that's going on, maybe I can answer some questions at the same time. Thanks for listening. Come and have a play if you want to, yeah.
So everyone, Dr. Alex is willing to answer a few questions on the microphones as well, but anyone who wants some more tactile experience, come up while we answer questions.
What's her name, Doctor? Okay.
All right, sorry, there were questions?
Yep. Amazing talk. Thank you so
you.
much. It was so interesting. One quick question. Those holes are quite big.
Yep.
I can imagine a cat or a fox even could get into those holes. So are we trapping the animals or like...
Great question, yeah. So that is absolutely something we've been thinking about as we designed it. So when choosing the hole size, the largest one, we were trying to think, what's the biggest animal we want to get in? Hopefully picking that where most cats, which are the smaller of the two predators, wouldn't be able to follow it in. So we kind of got to that. I think that's a 10 centimetre hole. So maybe a really small cat could get in. But the other thing that people ask is, well, couldn't a predator just tear it apart and get in there? And yes, they could. But the way we want these to function and the way they seem to be functioning when we put them out is not like a nest box. So most people think of a nest box. You want the animals to go in there, have their babies, they stay there, right? These are different in that we want them more to be like a big patch of dense lamandra or prickly hakea bush where there's lots of places for the animals to escape their predators, but they're not going to stay there and nest and den. So it shouldn't smell like bandicoot, and a fox shouldn't want to dig in there and get there because it's ducked in, it's ducked out the other side, and the fox is like, where did it go? You know, it's into the next one and it's off across the field. So in that sense, it's like, yeah, those stepping stones of like into one, out the other side, off it goes. Yeah, so we haven't seen any predators try to destroy them. We've seen interest from, say, a fox who seems to be just walking through its regular bit of territory and going, what is that? You know, and it will sort of investigate it and move on. Same with cats. And we had one juvenile fox. It was obviously a kit, and it just was like playing with one. And that's it. So it seems to be working as intended, which is more like an obstacle course, you know, lots of hidey holes, replacing that kind of dense knee-height vegetation that hides them from their predators. Yeah. Cool. Over there. Someone over there, if the microphone could, yeah. Oh, hot tip. Yep.
I'm just wondering,
Yep.
are they designed to be used in people's backyards or not so
Who's
much?
talking? I can't see, sorry. No,
I don't know, not me.
Oh gosh, I'm like, I can't see your mouth moving, and I found that very disorienting. Sorry, I can see you now.
Just wondering if they're designed to be used in backyards or are they...
Sorry, a little bit louder.
Oh, sorry. Just wondering if they're designed to be used in backyards or is it more for the purpose of what you're talking about?
So we are so happy for anyone to use them however they like to support wildlife. Someone else suggested a costume, but when it comes to backyards, because we've had this question before, and I guess my question is, what's your backyard like? Because I feel like I used to live in the real inner part of Sydney, and all we had was cockroaches, rats, and pigeons. And so I suspect if I put out habitat pods in there, I'd be making a nice, cozy home for my local rats. You know, so if you had like a nice big bush block and it got burnt, absolutely. And if you're somewhere in between, I'd be really keen to give it a try and see what happens, is my answer to that. But we are so open to people giving them a try for all sorts of different uses. Yeah. Sorry.
In one of the videos, it looked like they were putting something in to keep it attached to the ground. Like, are you using little pegs or what's keeping it in place?
Yeah, great question. So we ended up we looked at a bunch of options, and people were sort of initially thinking, oh, we'll just use rocks or something like that, but then we didn't want to encourage that because that's not great for your local reptile wildlife that might be using that as a shelter anyway. So we investigated options for biodegradable tent pegs. And there are definitely better and worse options there in terms of what actually biodegrades. We've got a particular brand that we recommend that is made out of a biodegradable starch, and it will take care of itself over more like 5 to 10 years. So it'll be there for longer than the pods, but it will eventually biodegrade away, and they hold them in quite firmly, just hammered into the skirt around. Yeah.
Cool, thanks.
How are we doing down there? Yeah, beautiful. Great. Yeah. There we go. Chris is doing all right. Was there another question? Sorry, while I'm... Oh, you did it. Great job. Even a child can do it. Woo! That's a win for the designer. Yep.
So, you're talking about how you're currently still collecting a lot of data and things like from different uses in different environments. And so I guess, obviously with the heating climate, we're getting more bushfire events, we're getting bigger bushfire events that actually clear more of the land when they burn. At what point do you think you'll have enough data collected to be able to publish to go, hey, we can now take this, because I could see this being used anywhere in the world, obviously, that has this sort of environmental problems where you've got these fires that are creating open spaces?
Yeah, so there's kind of two parts to that question, one being the data. And what I'm finding, and I probably should have realised this already as a wildlife ecologist, is that the answer in ecology is often it depends. Depends on where you are, depends on the local fauna, depends on the weather, etc. And then the other part of that is that while it's really easy to collect data showing what animals use them, figuring out whether you're actually benefiting those animals is a whole other question, right? Because the easiest way to monitor is put cameras out, and you might see 20 images of a bandicoot using this pod. Is that one bandicoot coming 20 times, or is that 20 bandicoots? So we're still trying to tease that out and work out how to do that better, which is part of what the big study in Ku-ring-gai is doing. So we're actually pointing the cameras alongside the clusters of pods so that we're not looking at the pods themselves, and we're hoping that animals that pop by, there should be more activity in the area, not just they're drawn in and we're getting more images because they want to hang out at the pods. But realistically, to do a really good job of that, it's a huge logistical challenge, because you'd want to do live trapping, which involves a lot of people hours and a lot of paperwork, and actually be able to mark and recapture and say, yes, there's more animals surviving at these sites. So that's where we'd like to go with it. We need a bunch of funding for that. And then the second part of the question, like worldwide, like absolutely, LA fires, Europe's burning, Tasmania's burning, like there's lots of places where they could potentially be put in to help out. So we have an eye to that as well, but at the moment it's just me and one other person. So yeah, we definitely have a view for that, yeah. Yeah. Microphone? Oh, yeah. Up and over.
We'll work.
That's it. Yeah. Nice. Ooh, I'm warm.
Have you tried other shapes? So I was just wondering, if it was more a traditional box, would it be cheaper? A box with a diamond or something inside it and then just some holes?
Yeah. So another question, similar to that one that we often get asked, is there a way to make it out of I get my wine delivery every month. Can I use that box? I think it'd be awesome. It'd be a great place to get to, but there's a lot of sort of problems. So first of all, the designer will tell you that a lot of the structural integrity of this comes from the triangular shapes of it. So he's an 80 kilogram man, and he stood on the tip of one of those, and it kind of blunted it a bit, but it held his weight. Anyone who can balance well is welcome to try. But it's that triangular shape, and it sort of helps as well with the water running off it when it rains. We've seen those ones get really saturated and then just kind of slightly collapse in on themselves, and that internal structure again that's all triangles holds them up. It dries out and it keeps going. Funnily enough, when they do biodegrade, they tend to sort of melt out from the bottom because that internal structure is so strong. So it's kind of witch hat effect. So I guess all those kind of benefits that are designed into it with this particular shapes are pretty integral to its performance. But that said, my original dream was for these to be made out of a paper mache pulp from totally recycled materials, etc. It was really the designer, and he gave it all a really red hot go to his credit, but it just didn't work for a bunch of reasons, just the time made to make one unit The fact that just as soon as it got wet, collapsed, no matter what kind of coating we put on it, etc. So my dream is to have them made out of something like that. We have so much packaging material. We're thinking about reaching out to like IKEA, who have huge amounts of cardboard that they have all around their furniture, for example, and finding a way of reusing something that's already out there. But I think we're still a few steps away from that. Yeah. Cool. Anyone else? All right. Might have exhausted the questions and the enthusiasm at putting them together. Still got some going. Great job, guys. Well, thank you so much for listening to me. I really appreciate it. And if anyone wants to chat afterwards or reach out, I'm really happy to chat to anyone about any particular use cases or ideas. We are actually going to go back to the drawing board. As part of this, it's really fun as well, working with a designer. We notice something, we see another good idea, we go back for the next run and we adjust it a bit. So, you know, we've already got a few things we're thinking about trying for the plant one, about like angling it to get the water delivered to the seedling, or adding an add-on bit that makes them taller if you've got deer or something like that. So, you know, great ideas are also welcome as well. But otherwise, thank you.
So thank you so much, Dr. Alex. I will come and have a chat because it's